What's going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome. We just want to appreciate you for making time to be here with us. Whenever I come together with the Haymarket community and with my comrades and colleagues here, I know that, I'm where I'm supposed to be. So, welcome to Solidarity Against Sadism. We decided that it was time for us to kind of come together and do this once again, partially because of the way that things have escalated. And, as always, it's not only the attacks on democracy, the attacks on people and bodies and freedom that have escalated, but also, our resistance has escalated in certain ways. So, one thing I just want to say is the news cycle. I don't know about y'all, but the news cycle for me is like absolutely devastating and confusing. My good friend Alec Sanders sometimes says one of the problems with breaking news is that actually can leave you more confused if you follow the news like every second. You're sort of like this whole telling history by the second hand or something. And I rely on my comrades who are here in this call with us to actually step back and take what we need to take in terms of real analysis, understanding what we really need to figure out, and also just to never sink totally into despair, but actually to kind of like think about what's actually pushing back. So, digging into that, we're gonna move into it. Everybody, take that deep breath and let's just be here for a minute. You know what I mean? Mute your phones, turn it off. Throw it across the room, whatever you gotta do to get present because we here for a minute. And if it's cool, I'm gonna start with a question I'd love to pose to you, Naomi. So again, these last few weeks have been really kind of dizzying, and I think the murder of killing of Charlie Kirk and the events after that really ramped that up to a whole new level. Of course, Charlie Kirk's killing was a shock. Um, but then in the immediate aftermath of that, we see a number of shocks being engineered by Trump and other folks in the aftermath of that. And so I was wondering if you could just slow us down for a minute to understand, a little bit about the immediate response to what happened to Charlie Kirk, the attacks on the left that have emerged after that, and to what extent you think these efforts to attack the left are effective.
Sure. Well, it's great to see you. It's great to be with you. I actually just came just out of a graduate seminar I'm teaching about what we're calling the long arc of fascism. And I today this week it was this Haymarket book that we were reading, lots of stickies on it, the Black anti-fascist tradition, and it was such a rich conversation. So I just want to not just thank Haymarket, but really thank you for this book, and really encourage folks to get it if they haven't. Among the many great Haymarket titles that make sense of this moment, provide tools and inspiration. We found it really useful as a group. So wanted to mention that. Um, yeah. So the you're right that I mean I hesitate over the word shock, though I have used it much in my life, because I don't think it's. I do think that the assassination was shocking, um, on so many levels, including just visually. But I also want to acknowledge that we have seen so many things visually that we thought we would never see, including an ongoing live stream genocide. Um, so was it, how did they exploit it? I mean, I think that they were already going really hard, as we know, and as we've discussed before. They've never stopped. They have never taken a breath. So I think, what we're feeling is not exactly shock as it is just exhaustion and overwhelm and brain scrambling, and what it is like to have, have this come at folks from all directions, right? And they were already checking a whole lot off of their wish list, going after migrants first of all, going after universities in Chenjerai. I know you're going to be giving us an update on that. Going after specifically Palestine organizing on university campuses, which was very high on their list. But they did have a few moves that they hadn't yet made, and I think that some of them um, we were aware of, and we're kind of wondering, like, when is the other shoe going to drop, right? Like, this didn't come out of nowhere. they had tipped their hats in lots of ways, but they hadn't gone after some of the groups that we thought that they were going to go after. I don't think they had quite figured out how to go after the infrastructure of the left, hadn't quite figured out what the story was. They were using Palestine as a wedge, right, to go after a lot, but they hadn't fully figured out how to resolve that with a lot of, their discourse about freedom of speech, maybe. Um, they were also losing the narrative, right before the assassination, over Epstein, over Israel, fractures within their coalition, over the economy, and the sorry state of job creation. Also, some reporting about Trump's crypto scams, which is a whole other thing that I think we really do need to talk about, because I do think there's a lot of distraction going on, from the fact that we are starting to understand that this White House is essentially one giant bribery crypto scam on a scale I don't think we can fully comprehend. Um, so so I think that what the Kirk assassination provided was the opportunity to go on the offensive, regain the narrative, and grab that megaphone, play the victim with incredible zeal and melodrama, and launch the war on the left that they have wanted to wage since day one. Also, take the mask off the Christian nationalist nature of the project that was clear, from when we saw Project 2025, right? This hasn't been a secret, but they denied it. They're not denying it anymore, right? So, I think there's a lot of similarities between what they're doing with the left and what they did with Palestine organizing, of trying to equate the entire movement with Hamas, or with October 7th. So now the entire left is the Charlie Kirk assassination. I mean, I listened to Steve Bannon the next day, and he made it very clear what the formulation was going to be. He said it's MAGA versus Mangione and Mamdani. That was the formulation. So and this has been ongoing. And so I think that they believe they have the equation that they need. And it's a Palestine playbook, right? I mean, this is what we've always said about Palestine, is that the exception becomes the rule. And they learned a lot from how to try to take down a movement, in this way. So I think that that's what we're seeing. I think if you look at the Capital Research document, which, where they talk about the funders and the groups that they fund and how they're going to go after them now, I'm not going to list the groups, but I think what you notice is that they're going after base building organizations. They've thought a lot about where the left is strong. And, that's why, I'm glad that we are talking about solidarity in the face of it, because it is only the strength of all of these groups responding together that can respond to this strategy, which is a divide and conquer strategy, which is a sort of pick them off one by one, which is, intimidate the funders, things like that. So, you asked me, Chenjerai, about the initial response. I just want to say, for those of you who didn't watch what's going on right now, or in the last hour, Trump just gave, the Medal of Freedom to Charlie Kirk's widow, to Charlie Kirk posthumously, and he reiterated all of these talking points, that this is what it's about. They don't have any real interest in the actual assassin. They want to use this to go after the left. Yes, that's how I would sum it up. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. And I like the way that you're, as always, I think, our analysis is the ways in which trying to attend to what's new here while also recognizing these things as an escalation, right? And how they're taking playbooks from before, like, and reconfiguring them to adapt to new modes. One thing I remember a sort of tape that happened from Trump's meeting with El Salvadorian leaders, saying that he really wanted to figure out how to sort of use the mechanism he was using on people who were citizens. That remember that tape was overheard, and I think it really allows us to think about some of the things that are happening as part of a real effort to bring the war home, right? Which is what these hyper nationalist projects always do, right? Is that it's always in the vein of protecting us from a foreign threat, and then the threat ultimately winds up being internal. And that's not to say that the push against a foreign threat is legitimate by any means. Um, so I was wondering, Keeanga, if you could talk about what we're now seeing as this sort of real spectacle of this of this war brought to the home front?
Well, one of the things that I keep thinking about is Greg Gandon's book, The End of the Myth, and what happens when the U.S. is really no longer as committed or invested in a kind of outward expansion that has really defined um, the uh, the character of the U.S.'s military and capital ambitions since the beginning, and what happens when we sort of reach the end of a particular idea of the frontier, um, and the war is no longer expanding outward but begins to turn inward. And so I thought I've been thinking about that in light of the kind of um, absurdity. This is the word I keep coming back to and thinking about the Trump administration, and not as a way to make light of what the administration is doing, but to really try to grapple with some of the what seems like incoherence and contradiction, and kind of senselessness. And so, on the one hand, you have Trump literally campaigning for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think this is why the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is kind of being furiously negotiated in the hours before the Peace Prize is supposed to be awarded, because Trump really, feels like this will kind of round out his presidency. Um, so Trump is positing himself as a deal maker, a peacemaker internationally, while at the same time he's declaring war on American cities, and not just in a rhetorical way, but deploying, attempting to deploy the military, federalizing the National Guard to send them into quote unquote blue cities, threatening to send the Marines into blue cities. We know from uh, uh, Pete Hegseth's signal that there was discussion about sending the 82nd Airborne into Portland. Um, we know that they have ICE agents dressed up like soldiers, and that there was this elaborate operation in Chicago a couple of weeks ago that involved Black Hawk military helicopters with soldier agents rappelling down from the helicopters into a homeless shelter on the south side of Chicago, the neighborhood of South Shore, where they proceeded to terrorize the occupants, the residents of that building, including zip tying men, women, and children, separating children from their parents. And then, with all of these actions, having videographers on hand who take photos, or who take moving pictures, and then those are turned into ads for what the Trump administration is doing, and distributed on the internet, and they're used to recruit to Department of Homeland Security. They're used to recruit to ICE, and they're used as a general tool of intimidation of the populations that this is directed at. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about in relationship to that is a kind of unbridled racism that the Trump administration is really unleashing. And there is a shocking quality to that. If we think about where we were at just 5 years ago, to go from this mass movement against racism in 2020 to uh, literal white supremacist at the helm of the government. I mean, I don't think, sometimes, people can describe anything that is remotely racist or that is questionable as white supremacy or and I don't typically subscribe to that because I think that you can sort of overuse terms and frameworks and it makes it lose its power and its meaning. But I don't think it's hyperbole at all to talk about this administration as one of white supremacy, like literal, that white people should be supreme. I mean, I think it has the contradictions that the political framework of white supremacy has always had, which is not the belief that all white people are supreme, but as a way to kind of contain the tensions around class elitism, inequality that exist among white people by offering working class and poor whites a seat at the table with the white elites. And so I think, the war on immigrants has been the most kind of obvious example of this. And I think in their view, they see immigrants as a population that they can sort of unite the American public in despising by blaming them for now, the immigrants are blamed for the lack of health care. They're blamed for inflation. They're blamed for any number of things. And so that becomes the kind of opening salvo to get the public sort of used to and comfortable with agents of the state roaming around in masks and picking up people and building this ever widening apparatus to contain people. But I also thought that the kind of resurgence of the rhetoric around crime, which had also sort of gone sharply out of fashion a decade ago, has been resurfaced as a way to then excuse the use of federal power and troops and the threat of troops to go into U.S. cities. This idea that because crime exists, that the federal government has some particular kind of obligation to deploy troops to those cities to deal with the issue of crime. And really, they're looking at cities that are either have Black majorities or have significant Black populations, whether it's Chicago, Washington, D.C. There are threats of going into New Orleans, the threat of going into Memphis, although I do think there are National Guard present in Memphis. And it's all sort of hinged on this idea that the cities are overrun with bloodthirsty. Charlie Kirk, in the days before he was killed, described the Black majority city of Washington, D.C. As having cockroaches, and that he applauded Trump's efforts to go wipe out the cockroaches in Washington, D.C. And so I think that it's troubling, not just for reasons why it would be troubling, that you have the federal government trying to really normalize the logic around racism, the kind of pernicious use of this terminology of illegal immigrants, and really the most kind of racist and destructive language in describing people. But I mean, that would be troubling unto itself. But the way that this then activates a layer of racist within our society to act out upon these ideas is disturbing. And I think uh, it's really a part of uh, this effort that they see as sort of conjoining the power of the Trumpian state to this kind of localized uh, MAGA um, fellow travelers, to get them to also be activated on the ground. And so that's not good. That's not good. And I think that we've seen, it's not the whole story. We've seen, in Washington D.C., uh, ordinary people sort of rejecting this and marching and trying to organize themselves. There's been regular protests in Chicago at ICE detention centers, but in different neighborhoods. And I think that these are important sort of opening steps. And there's always the question of how do we cohere these kind of local, important local responses to what the Trump administration is doing, and to a kind of more systematic, larger, connected network. But I do think it's worth sort of thinking about what the rhetoric and the kind of actions of the Trump administration is having on the people to whom these practices and policies are directed at.
Yes, thank you for that, Keeanga, and that inspires me. I want to sort
Can
of
I just say one quick thing?
Sure.
I forget it. It is. I think the media must become overwhelmed or intimidated. I don't know what the reason is, but the Trump influencers, people who have his cell number, right, who are in regular contact with Laura Loomer, describing Jasmine Crockett, a Black woman who is a member of Congress, as a Black ghetto bitch. And that it barely even resonates in the media as a fucking problem. That a person who the president has no problem saying is a advisor to him, is someone who he respects, talks about a Black woman who's a member of Congress in the most sort of crass, racist way possible, is a statement about what this administration is trying to unleash.
And yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's far more explicit than even what I was going to say is just, the way that references to great replacement theory have just become so, trafficked and so widely, and not even, I remember when it was like there would be a shooter who referenced great replacement theory, and because it was easily identifiable, people were like, oh my God, now it's, people who are described as leaders trafficking this. And I want to say, that as somebody who was, I'm just going to say, on Professor Watch List, when you have that bubbles up, whatever particular controversy, organizations like that or certain other similar types of institutions do, what that results for me and for many professors I'm in community with is like death threats in your email, all kinds of, threats of sexual assault against you, the most vile kinds of stuff. I remember the first time I shared with a colleague what was in my email inbox, and he was like, oh my God, because he just had no idea. And it was always timed systematically. When Milo Yiannopoulos came to Clemson, for example, I could still I have many of the emails. I could show people what suddenly appeared in my email inbox. And these threats are real. Like, I had to really think about security. I mean, I didn't choose to move at that time, but your point, Keeanga, about what's being riled up and stirred up and unleashed is very real. One other thing I want to point out, though, when we think about this spectacle of the war at home, I can't help but just remind that the secure communities policy, which was sort of inherited by Obama. At the point when Obama inherited it, it was in 14 jurisdictions in the United States. This is something that essentially gave the fingerprints of data of people who are undocumented or allegedly undocumented to local police departments. And under Obama, it expanded to 3,000 counties in the United States, and also became mandatory. And this was under Tom Homan. So the sadism that is now being escalated was fully carried through and amplified through the Obama administration. And I think we have to at least acknowledge and grapple with that, regardless of what we want to say. And the other thing I would say is that I was glad that you pointed out the resistance, because it's interesting. Like, there's one image I'm thinking about. I think it's in Chicago, of an ICE agent atop someone's back. And he's almost like riding this person as he tries to restrain the person. And that, for me, is like one of the most sadistic images. But it's interesting that that image is coupled with the community coming in and interrupting that. And that form of solidarity, right, at tremendous risk, at a point when people are being deported everywhere to, community members were like, no, this is enough. And what I'll say, to just agree with you on that note, is that those kinds of efforts of resistance, we're seeing them rise up, and I think we have to lay claim to the ways in which those are inspiring, and those show us that, all hope is not lost. And at the same time, to hold that while also saying, in the end, it's going to have to be institutional responses. We're probably not going to achieve the scale without institutions pushing back. Astra, I want to bring you in. I want to talk about what's going on in the Middle East, because this is an important time for the Middle East. But on the way to that, I also want to talk about religion a little bit. And I was wondering if you could talk about the function of religion in all of this, how it's playing out, because it's what's amazing is that to hear some tell it, this is like we're in some kind of like moral or ethical renaissance because of a return to Christianity or something like that. Could you help us understand how you think that is playing out a little bit?
Yeah, maybe I'll connect it to what's been said. I mean, Naomi mentioned the incredible religiosity at the memorial for Charlie Kirk. And I do want to make a caveat that as we talk about Christians in the most right-wing formation here, that's, I actually think it's a call actually to progressive Christians and to the tradition of social activism that so many Christian people are part of. And I think actually it's a real urgent moment for people who have more liberal religious values to actually step up to the plate. But yeah, I mean, what we saw in that memorial, with all of its religiosity and the declarations that of this Christian martyrdom, was sort of the consequences of a Christian nationalism that has been brewing behind the scenes and growing in strength for a long time. And as Naomi said, was there on the pages of Project 2025. And now it is very much a mask off moment, that this is what the agenda is. And, I think it's one way to describe it is it's a holy war. This domestic war is a holy war. And I find it so interesting in the worst way, because, I went to some of those early Trump rallies, back in 2015, and, they were anti-hedge funds, kind of Potemkin populism, but so against the war in Iraq, so against the forever wars, the war on terror. But what you see in this administration is they want that warrior energy, because, wars are always also a budget. They're a budget document. They're an excuse to divest or invest, right? So much, the history of the United States is a history of war spending, for, sometimes for good, in the sense that a lot of investments in the welfare state were deeply connected to the warfare state, but also a history of divestment. So this holy war, I think, accomplishes multiple things. I mean, one is, when you're waging a holy war, you have a license to be anti-democratic, because you are speaking to a higher law. This is about sort of metaphysical, biblical right and wrong. And so this is, and they're explicit. I mean, I've been reading quite a bit about this, and the goal really is to replace civil law with 10 commandments. I mean, and this is explicitly said. Kirk, after the onset of COVID, started Turning Point USA Faith, right, and took things in an explicitly Christian direction that had actually not been part of his libertarian politics, and said, his goal was to restore biblical values. And that is what's astonishing for a political machine that claims to be pro-America is that it's anti-constitutional on a deep level. It's because it is claiming this higher authority. And so this holy war is part of the bigger attack on democracy. But again, there's this budgetary aspect, and we're sitting here talking in the government shutdown. So these programs, we're talking about ICE, come with a massive investment in infrastructure, and also the offering of jobs to people who are going to become increasingly desperate for what? For jobs, for work, for student debt relief, which now you can get if you take those jobs. And so it's an infrastructure of bigotry. I mean, I think it's a war on solidarity, and and the left, a war on solidarity that's happening by encouraging people to have no other choice but to take on positions where they are part of this infrastructure of harm. So we're seeing, and I think this is part of the solution for us as the left, is to emphasize this. Our healthcare is being decimated. Our rents are going up. Our debt is exploding. And it's because they're spending money on war, as they always do, only this time the war is against people within our borders, whether they're Americans who are the enemy within, which is now all of Democrats, anyone who's not MAGA, but also, of course, people who they suspect of being deportable. So that's, and I think that people are feeling it. People are feeling the truth that their economic lives are not improving. And so there's a whole lot of fake shit, but that's hard to fake, when you can't pay your bills, when you can't pay for groceries, when the groceries are getting smaller, when you're getting, you're spending more for less, which is what's happening. Like, that's hard to lie to people about. So I think the war, we're in a holy war. And I think, I'm wrestling with this as a leftist. I feel like I tend to have attribute more rationality to events that are happening, and mainly economic rationality. And this really is about money. I mean, Ann Coulter did an interview a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "This is the most corrupt administration ever in the history of the world, but I don't care because they're mean to immigrants." So it is corrupt. They're motivated by money, but there's something there, for many people too. They are motivated by a deep sense of religious righteousness, and it is part of the deep misogyny and the racism, the white supremacy, and the destructive apocalyptic fervor we're seeing.
Definitely. I'm not going to try to summarize what you said, because I realize that as moderator, I have the ability to get more bites at the apple than everybody else as I summarize people's comments poorly. But I also want to say this, y'all are my comrades, and I think in our regular conversations, we disagree with each other a lot. So I'm just going to say this. If y'all don't disagree with me or somebody in this conversation, we have failed. That's my charge to try to do this. And I'm sure you have no problem doing that. You have some time.
Yes, I disagree with what you just said there.
I'm going to fake disagree with Keeanga.
Okay.
Just in the sense that, I mean, I don't disagree, but I do think that in conceptualizing the war at home, right, and thinking about the end of the frontier, right, the end of the myth, and building on Grandin's work, this is really related to what they're doing beyond the U.S.'s borders, right? But I'm thinking about I think we should think about the helicopter, on a building in Chicago, alongside the missile strikes on the boats in the Caribbean, right? Because I think that they're really related, this idea of the homeland, right? And the attacks on the quote unquote enemies within, and also that fortressing of the border, which then gives them license to extend their sphere to wherever the hell they say, which of course is what Israel does, right? Like this is what they did with the flotilla. Like, well, these are our waters. They're not, right? We can come back to that, but so I'm not disagreeing at all, but I'm pretending to disagree.
No, it's a good point. That's a good point.
I could disagree with the idea that any of this is Christian, right? Because there's something unbelievably profane about what is going on, which also, frankly, has a lot to do with Zionism. I mean, I think what we're seeing in a lot of different contexts is nation states claiming the right to act as gods. I mean, individual figures claiming the right to act as gods, claiming the right to fulfill prophecy, right? So, and that is a potent combination. But if we look at the performance of the Kirk Memorial, right? The bestowing of him the status, of Jesus, but really, the deity is Trump at the end, right? So it's not a secularization exactly. It's a kind of a profaning, right? Where you're using all of the force of religiosity, but you're directing it at the nation state, which is how you can resolve claiming to be Christian and treating Christian migrants from, overwhelmingly Christian migrants from Central America the way that they do. So I think that there are possible solidarities that we can develop around disentangling these violent ethnostates from spiritual traditions. So maybe there's something
Separation of church and state. We should try it.
Just try that and democracy.
Yeah, Chenjerai, we need you to talk about the university too. We need to hear how this is playing out in some of the work you're doing.
Absolutely, but I do want to make sure we return to this question of solidarity and also like meaning making, because you were talking about look, I'm a materialist to the core. I mean, also listen, you want to organize Black folks, you better have some faith somewhere in the mix, is what I've learned. You know what I mean? So I think there are many forms of, we shouldn't cede that territory, and you pointed that out, that there's other versions of this that can be laid claim to. So we should come back to that as well, especially when stuff is so destitute. I'm taking lots of forms of meaning making into consideration.
Can I say something about this question of solidarity before?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because I do think it's important to say that Trump is really unpopular. The agenda is really unpopular. And in some ways it feels like, we talk about the fractures and fragmentation of the left, but there's also an element that exists on the right, but that Trump is able to hold this coalition together because he provides something to each of them, whether it's the evangelicals, the tech bros, the Christian nationalists, the just sort of mainstream corporate Republicans, but they're also kind of riven by division. Maybe, we probably won't have time, but it'd be interesting to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yes. And, the kind of most high profile, I wouldn't call her a defector, but certainly someone who's a kind of outspoken presence, MAGA presence, who has begun to sort of question the Republican strategy and its impact. Like, what does America first mean to a certain faction of these people? But I think that the unpopularity of Trump and the Republican agenda, and the way that unpopularity, I think, will deepen with, the videos of this ICE insanity are powerful. I do think the videos of kidnapping people off the streets, of brutally assaulting people, of attacking children, I think that these are impactful, and that, this is not what maybe some people signed up for this, but I think most of those people did not sign up for the pictures that are, of course, not streaming across the mainstream news, but are streaming across social media platforms. And so, to me, it's the constituent elements of building an opposition, I think, continue to grow. And that, to me, that's that's a positive, and I think is something to kind of hold on to. There are people who are cheering this. Don't get me wrong, but there are a lot more, I think, who are horrified about it. And this question of what do we do is the one that millions of people are asking.
Well, I do think that there is, I think it's important to portray them as agents of chaos, the agents of chaos that they are, because it really is a weakness. I think if we look at how dictatorships, get the consent, of societies that they coup around the world, often they have consent at the beginning, and it's because people trade security, a sense of calm, for their rights. And I don't think these folks have the discipline for that, right? Because they can't stop sowing chaos. So I don't think anybody feels like, yes, things are finally under control now, right?
Right.
Which is why they so badly want to provoke chaos. So that puts, I think, folks in a complicated position, right? Because they're going to keep trying to provoke, and I think they're really going to escalate New York after the elections.
Yeah.
And then they want that video, right? Like they want to be able to tell the story. So, I think Portland's done amazing, in kind of mocking them. So I think people have shown, I'm not watching enough MAGA TV at the moment to know what's happening with the narrative wars, but I do know that these guys are not making anyone feel calm and secure.
That's the most surprising statement I've heard yet, that you're not watching enough.
I listen. I listen.
I don't know if that's true. Tell the truth, Naomi.
I rely on to go down the road and see.
I've got to be able to multitask.
Yeah.
But I want to say, I think, that the chaos that they're sowing is, it's interesting how I think it functions. Because on one hand, I think a lot of people are they see it and they're outraged. It's not what they necessarily signed up for. But I think their bar for, this is probably obvious, but their bar for success is lower than ours. All they have to do is demoralize people and get people to kind of not engage or not come out or feel like things are pointless, I think, and this is especially the case, I think, where I'm just going to say Democrats on the at least at the national level have just failed to offer any kind of electoral or leadership path out of this, or even folks that can name what's going on in any kind of serious way. And so I think that's part, like so if that condition persists, which we can't allow it to persist, but to the extent that it persists, people see those videos, and I think a lot of people, you have the courageous community people we have to shout out who are rising up. Folks have seen in various cities whole community centers having trainings about how to stop these, how to stop ICE from doing some of the horrors that they're doing. And we want to shout out all those people, because people are taking real risks in real time, and it's pushing back, and it's effective in many cases. Many cases, you could see someone be de-arrested at that moment, and that mattered for that person's life, even if it's not at the scale we want. That said, I think there's a lot of people who are just they're gonna sit at home and not engage because they feel demoralized. And then what happens during election time is what happens. And so I think that's their bar, is they just are like, we have to hurt some people, demoralize some people, and create these spectacles. That's part of how, you all are smarter than me when it comes to the sort of ideological politics of sadistic politics, but I'm sure that's part of it, right? You don't even have to actually win or have a real vision. You just got to sow this chaos. can I talk briefly about higher education, and then we should probably see if we have
Please.
some smart questions from folks. Uh, one thing, one thing I know a little bit about. So I should just say, the puzzle from the gate with this, with the attack on higher ed sector, is that we, all of us here, I want to give a special shout out to Astra's work with Debt Collective, have already been talking about the problems with higher education, right? The fact that it's not like the institutions that existed now currently were somehow our horizon of revolutionary pedagogy for the people, right? That's not at all what the institutions were. So we were already in the midst of trying to transform our institutions in the right direction. And but I gotta say that people like, Ron DeSantis, Trump, Stephen Miller have lied about public education. Most of these people, by the way, while holding, degrees from Ivies, right? Like Trump went to Wharton, right? Want to talk about what higher education is, that it doesn't matter. And our vision of higher education is that it at least has to include the power of higher education to be something that is a healthcare kind of engine. And it is an engine of technology and thinking, of technological thinking, of understanding what it means to be, a human being, what it means to be, a participant in society, and also, a place where people can come together across these borders and rethink them. There's a reason why our movements and stuff like that, the campus and the education, has played a role, and that reason is actually related to the threat. And also, I should say, that yeah, I mean, just in terms of people having a fair shot in this country to try to get up. I mean, I don't like the idea that you have to have a college degree to survive. That shouldn't be the condition, but they're clearly taking away people's shot and trying to kick away the ladder. So that is has to be slayed. What that looks like at this recent escalation is, I think, like, there's at least three categories, which is retaliation and political repression. This is what we've seen from the AAUP. So, after Kirk, I mean, there were like 40 professors that were suspended or dismissed for things that, there's really, you can't really justify with any kind of due process, right? Somebody had a social media post that said something which they said, claimed mattered, or was related to this incident, and then some people are fired, and it's up to them and their lawyers to try to extract due process, which is in the mode that people are operating with a lot of times. Vina Dubal, and
Mhm.
Aaron, our counsel, they'll be the first to tell you that the law is not gonna get us out of this. But having those capacities of lawyers ready to try to get people some due process matters, right? It's part of how some of our people who have been deported, so some of them are at least temporarily back home. So that's one thing, is like just the retaliating political repression. I mean, our president, Todd Wolfson, the AUP president, is inbox full of death threats, and a lot of and in some ways he's maybe safer than other people who are at a smaller college and facing like these kinds of assaults I talked about. So that's one. This compact recently, a couple of weeks ago, Trump issued this compact which we're calling a loyalty oath. First, this was issued to 9 universities, and now it's kind of been opened up to a bunch of universities. It's posed as an invitation, but our colleague Lorena Grundy has said clearly this is a threat. Basically, that if you want to get this kind of funding, you have to agree to all these egregious conditions, including things that are pulling back, the ability to, all kinds of things having to do with affirmative action that was already kind of under attack, but any effort at inclusivity, all kinds of ways that is straight up state control of the university at an egregious level. And we've been arguing that people have to push back against that. And we've seen some victories in that, which we could maybe get to in a minute. But I will say that, you know, no university has signed it so far that we know of, at least publicly. And MIT explicitly pushed back on it. And I think that shows you, that's important. And I hope that empowers other people to do the same. And then, of course, there is the sort of immigration labor squeeze with this H-1B visa fee, which is also part of a long history of the way that they have looked, immigration things related to students, immigration policies of, they've cracked down in these ways. That's another category that's really important. And this attacks all kinds of solidarity, and is a mechanism also against certain kinds of dissent, but is also just kind of gutting the infrastructure of the university in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm not even talking about the crackdown on, this expansive definition of anti-Semitism and the way that's being applied to literally everything that someone claims makes people feel unsafe. And so, yeah, I just think that we're seeing all of those attacks at once. But for us, the strategy to fight those things has been coalition. We understand that the higher ed sector can't fight this alone. And we've seen incredible numbers of people and numbers of organizations coming to the coalition. The federal workers, like, for example, the Federal Unionists Network, all kinds of different organizations, and organizations who are not totally aligned on all the politics, it's important to say, are coming together to fight this, because we have to fight for the future of this sector. So, you know, it's look, I mean, I can just say, as somebody who's dealing with the AUP, the volume of attacks is staggering. And I know this really, I think about a professor I know who was fired for reasons that don't make any sense and living in someone's garage, and then eventually had to go home. Formerly, this person had a full job with, with benefits and everything else. So I guess I'll end by saying, though, it's kind of a proletarianization too for some professors who, and that's a big ugly word, but basically mean that there are some professors in our ranks who didn't understand they were on the shop floor with everybody else. You know what I mean? And now, it's much clearer to people that we have to fight across these categories of work. We have to fight with other sectors, and we got to be on the front line. So I'll stop there. Do we have any responses while I look to see if there's any questions we have? I don't know, to y'all that are watching, do you have any thoughts or questions you want? We have a few seconds to handle that, but while you think about that, I don't know if anybody has any responses or wants to maybe go back to some hope, encouraging things. Astra?
I mean, on the compact, this isn't a hopeful thing, but it's just that it was also revealed that one of the billionaires behind the compact for these schools is an owner of the University of Phoenix, which is a big predatory for-profit college. That, and as the representative of the debt collective here, for-profit colleges are it's an industry we've been organizing against for over a decade. And that kind of gives away the game, right? Like, what do they want at the end of this? They want fully privatized, subprime, online, quote unquote, education. Education as a pure product. And so if
maybe delivered by AI.
Ideally delivered by AI, with the AI doing the students' work as well in an infinite loop of AI, pseudo educational slop. And so that, I think AI is actually another really important sphere that is coming for education. There's, giving those Chat GPT subscriptions away free to students, and, pushing them on the institutions. And why, and I, as a non-professor, it's just like, why is this an arena that they're so eager to destroy? And it's because for all of the problems that we've worked on in higher ed over the years, the fact is that these are institutions of knowledge production. They're institutions where people are, given the space for a period of time to, think about bigger things. They are places where people do research that is not purely driven towards industry and profit. And so I think defending them is really essential. And I just want to give a huge thanks to AUP and everything you're doing, Chenjerai and Todd Wolfson. And you've had victories along the way, like the recent court case, that are really important.
Yeah, I should jump in and just say the AUP versus Rubio was a case we filed now. I think 7 lawsuits. I can't remember if it's 7 or 8, but we just had a huge First Amendment victory against the Trump's policy of ideological deportation. This is AOP versus Rubio. Everyone has to look up this case. The discovery was wild. I mean, it was like you start seeing. I mean, there was at one point the prosecution put. I mean, at one point the the Rubio people put an ICE agent on the stand, or an ICE administrator, and he said that he was he was basically like he was working on fentanyl overseas and other kinds of things, sort of terrorism. And then he was pulled off of that to arrest Ramesa Ozturk. And he said it was so odd. He was like, wait a minute, what did this person do again? And it was like she wrote an op-ed. And I mean, this is coming out into this is happening in court, and it's so wild. I'm sitting there like, is this their witness or ours? Because it was just what they were testifying to having gotten straight up intel from Canary Mission. So that's in the discovery, but in the decision, William Young, who's a Reagan-appointed judge, was absolutely declared. One thing he said was, the question here is whether immigrants are offered the right to the First Amendment, and the answer is unequivocally yes. And he just denounced the masks of ICE, saying that this is more egregious than what you even saw with slave patrols in the darkest part of American history. They didn't wear masks. I mean, and he really just pushed back in ways, and it was a big victory that will have some material effects. So everyone should check it.
I mean, I also just have to reiterate what I, said quickly earlier, which is that we really are seeing how the Palestine precedent, right, the Palestine exception, is being generalized, right? So, like, this is exactly what has happened to Palestinian professors, faculty, and people, who are engaged in pro-Palestine speech, and people have been losing their jobs for years. And then we saw universities, not just cave to pressure, but be the ones to, stick the police on their students. And that was a profound failure of solidarity, right? Because a lot of people didn't speak out who should have, and allowed that exception to stand. And now what we saw with Kirk was just like, well, maybe we just fire all these people who just said something we don't like about our friend, and that's that. And there was no stopgap, because the precedent had been going on for so long, and accelerated so much over the past 2 years. So, yeah.
Can I just say something about that? Because I think it is a really crucial point about, we can look around and say that free speech should be an issue because it affects such a broad swath of people, right? They are saying anyone left of Trump is a domestic extremist. So this should be the broad issue that, a broad coalition can be built. And yet there are complicating factors to that. And to me, one of the main ones has been this Palestine exception. And so when you have Josh Shapiro, who comes out and says, denounces Trump for his attacks on free speech and free expression, and then the University of Pennsylvania student newspaper comes out with a report, an investigative report, that found that Shapiro's office, Josh Shapiro's, the governor of Pennsylvania, was directly intervening in the board of trustees at the University of Pennsylvania to pressure the school administration to ban the Palestinian solidarity activist groups on campus, and to use the police to shut down the nonviolent encampment, then this is a problem, because it's another version of Trumpism, which is, we will defend speech that we like, but if we don't like it, then we'll allow the police to engage, police and administrators to engage in repression. We'll arrest activists that we don't like. We'll fire professors that we don't like. And, it's a similar thing with the president of Barnard, who writes this ridiculous op-ed in the New York Times saying that we have to be able to have uncomfortable conversations on campus. This is a woman who has led a scorched earth policy for the last 2 years on Barnard's campus, changing rules so that you can't have posters on your door, initiating expulsion procedures for students who hung a banner about Palestine, expelling and suspending more students than at any other time in the history of the school. then lecturing the public about having tough conversations, except for Palestine. And so as long as liberals, the establishment of the Democratic Party, continue to preserve this space of free speech, except around the issues that we don't like, it becomes impossible to cohere an opposition around this particular issue. The students were right. And as everyone around the world begins to recognize, right, the depths of depravity of what the Israeli state has engaged in, no one here has said that. People have been expelled. People have been, their records have been marred. Their reputations have been destroyed. They have been doxxed. They have lost their jobs. And no one has accounted for that. And so for those same people to then say, oh, we have to, what Trump is doing is horrible, and free speech and free expression, without taking up that issue, is the height of hypocrisy. And everyone who has been, who has recognized that, want nothing to do with it. And so this is a breach that has to be addressed if we are going to be able to actually build the type of coalition around this question of free speech, of the right to engage in political activism, of the right to free expression. We have to deal politically with this question of Palestine.
Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, it's just, I think about the price people paid for just uttering something which is not even at this point controversial. It's just really, fired, and no accounting. And the people that executed these things are still executing more things. We have some really interesting questions. But before we turn to those, there's a few things I want to make sure I don't forget. One of the questions has lifted up the fact that there's going to be a No King's Day protest coming up on October 18th. So for those of you who want to take the energy or, connect to that, there's lots of ways and orgs you can connect to it through. No King's Day. We're going to be in the streets. I will be in the streets. And, I would say take care while you're in the streets. Too, because it's real out here. Also, I want to shout out Hammer and Hope. Hammer and Hope is a magazine of Black politics and culture, and we are a community. We had an incredible teach-in with about Assata Shakur last night, done by Monifa Bandele and Dream Hampton, and it was really powerful. And we're going to be doing more, but I encourage everybody to become a member of Hammer and Hope. We do lots of stuff together with Haymarket. And it's just a place where you can sharpen your analysis, and there's just nothing like it. And I should also say that for the University Compact question, we're going to be having a teach-in on Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to, in conjunction with AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, we're really going to break it down why it's crucial the universities must resist this. So those are just a few things coming up. Any other announcements before we turn to some fascinating questions we have here? All right. Wow, there's so many interesting things came in. I'm going to mention this one here. Any thoughts on Curtis Yarvin's, I should have said trigger warning beforehand. Any thoughts on Curtis Yarvin's link to Silicon Valley and influence on Trump? Neocameralism is his alternative to democracy, advocating for a governance model structured like a corporation. Any comments on that?
He's upset and threatening to flee the country most recently. So Trump is not going fast enough for some of his accelerationist fans. But I mean, the guy is just a total joke. He's a failed businessman, despite the capital he raised from people like Peter Thiel and others. And, he's like a court jester of corporate monarchy. But I think, to me, his trolling appeals to the politics of the far right. He's basically making the case for the end of democracy and the imposition of a corporate dictator. But to me, what troubles me more is how much press he's getting, and this speaks to the failures of the media issue. It was very, very telling and very distressing when, immediately after the election, he was on the cover of the New York Times, and then he was profiled in the New Yorker. And I think, I think it's important to talk about ideas. I'm not saying that we don't engage with the ideas that are percolating from the sort of authoritarian fringes to the mainstream, but I think we have to be careful to not present them as actually intellectually serious. And there was a kind of gravitas given to him by the mainstream media, and a kind of just, this sense of like, we're going with there's a vibe shift, right? So now let's profile all of these reactionaries.
GQ did a profile of Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes also just had a profile in the New York Times. I mean, this is somebody who's,
it's just like a quirky kind of, it's disturbing.
Yeah. So I think taking these people seriously means taking the implications of their ideas seriously, and the implications of their ideas are lethal.
Yeah. Does anyone else? We have lots of other questions, but any other comments or thoughts about that before we continue? There's one question. Can you talk about the kinds of coalitions that you think will be workable in this moment of intensified repression, given the landscape of fracture on the left? And they give some examples of reductionist, identity-based organizing, union capitulation versus wins. I guess it's a question about coalition, which seems crucial. It's a big one to handle on the fly, but I'm saying we got the heavyweights.
I mean, I think it's context dependent. I don't think there is one, like I think that's what the No Kings protests are trying to do, like a very big tent and, kind of going straight for the top. But we're seeing some amazing coalition work. We talked a little bit about AI. Some of the coalitions that are taking on data centers and in some cases winning at the local level are really, really interesting and reminiscent in a way of, the coalition that kept the Amazon new Amazon headquarters from coming to New York some years ago. And precisely because they're local, you really have this opportunity for people to get to know their communities and meet their neighbors, and maybe even some people who voted for Trump. Astra and I recently met with an incredible coalition out of Tucson that just had a big win against an Amazon data beyond a data center, just data colony. And it really does bring so many issues together, but I think there's a real opportunity to fight these data centers in that we've not had before, because there's always the offer of jobs associated with these fights, right? Whether it's the data center or whether it's the pipeline, communities come together to fight them, and it's like, well, do you hate jobs? But the thing about AI is that it's actively attacking jobs, right? So you have this opportunity to, bring together gentrification and environmental injustice and climate, and also like it would be nice if there was some work. So yeah, I think that's exciting.
I was really glad to see you lift up data centers, because one of the things I'm seeing in the resistance to them, because one of the things I'm seeing in my media world is some of the most widely circulated reflections on AI are like, people like myself, professors, like, what does this mean for my existence? They're like these existential questions about AI versus humanity. And then there's a whole other set of questions that are about the material struggles of often Black and brown communities in the United States, in places like Memphis and Louisiana and Philly and everywhere else, fighting. And I feel like those are happening in different spaces, those two conversations. And so it's really important to lift those up. It's also because of the fact that you said there's been victories. You know what I mean? I'm releasing a new podcast. I might just need to make my whole podcast about wins on the, what I'm saying, on the left, because I feel like we don't know. And I know we're scared of like being too celebratory, but at some point when we don't feel like there's any wins, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Let me just say, other questions are, there's a couple of interesting ones. There's one really simple question, and the person just basically says, what in practical terms can I do to help?
Say that again.
Person says, what in practical terms, can I do to help?
Well, I would agree with, or just, amplify what Naomi said earlier, which is it's context dependent. It's like, where are you? And I think that there is a great opportunity now to connect with people wherever you are, to figure out that question. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine um, a single individual being, super impactful in this moment. But we're seeing uh, people everywhere, every day, connecting with their neighbors, with their classmates, with people in their communities to try to figure out how do we respond in this moment. And I think that there are, you know, so many kinds of uh, local responses to what is happening, depending on where you are. And I would encourage you um, to reach out to people who are thinking the same things that you're thinking. And if you don't know who those people are, um, to try to find them, wherever you are. I think now is a great time. If you're not, on a campus or connected to what you might think of as an activist community, to do book groups, to read something together, to invite other people to read it along with you, and then to find out what is happening in the area, the community, the neighborhood that you're in. Um, I think this moment lends itself to that kind of necessity and creativity. And I think there really is a role for everyone to play. And always a reminder, we are 8 months into this. Um, this is a long situation that we're facing.
Well, in the spirit of enjoying wins when they come and appreciating them, I would just say, when Zoran Mamdani becomes mayor of New York
Mhm.
City, that is going to be really sweet. And I hope people carve out the
Yes.
space to truly celebrate, enjoy, and embody the spirit of that campaign, which
Yeah.
is so beautiful, right? Like in the way that it encouraged people to fall in love with their city again, and to actively be anti-fascist by not being afraid of difference on so many levels, and build those local coalitions. It is a deeply anti-fascist development,
Mhm.
that should be, and it is a physical space in the world that is extraordinary. And not to say that it's going to suddenly become a socialist utopia, but there are possibilities, and there are possibilities to, I always think, Keeanga, but the first conversation that we had right after the election, where you said we need to have a welcoming left, right?
Mm.
A welcoming left. I've quoted you so often because I think one of the problems, one of the challenges of the experience of being punched in the face over and over again by this administration is that we are, responding as we should, um, against them. But I think we can't afford to forget a feeling that a lot of us had after the election, which is that we wouldn't be here if we had done everything right, right? And that there was
Mhm.
a need for introspection. And I've felt all along that that Zoran was really showing us another way of doing politics, and a way of building that welcoming left, and the whole
Yep.
movement was. So what becomes possible in the city, in terms of building an irresistible kind of a left, I think is really, really exciting. It's going to take everybody, because they're going to go after it so hard.
Mhm.
So let's not only respond defensively. Let's also remember to celebrate that,
Mhm.
as a practice in a way.
Totally.
We We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Muted.
Chen.
Sorry. I said I kind of want to. There's other questions, but I like this note we're on, and just to add to the upliftment, maybe I'll give you the last word, Astra. But I was at the National Nurses Global Solidarity convening in San Francisco, and this was thousands of nurses, and it was really instructive of like a glimpse of the kind of left we need, the kind of movement. I mean, folks at all levels of sort of political study and understanding, folks in different class locations all over the world. There was some Brazilian nurses who had some really instructive lessons about how they got nurses elected to political positions, because they had because of the way that all the crises intersect for them in their places where they're caring for folks. They took to the streets. They were very clear about capitalism. They were clear about using their labor power to sort of institutionally push back against ICE's efforts to come in. So I just felt like the things I'm hearing from every different sector, and of course the nurses are in, many of them are related to universities. I feel like I was hearing at that convening, but with a clear vision of being on the march, being in solidarity. They were welcoming to me because I'm not a nurse in any way, although I did work in a couple of emergency rooms. And I just felt, for a minute, for a couple of days, I felt like, man, we have a vision, we got power, we got people, and I want to hold on to that energy and extend it to everybody. So go find your nurses and support them. Astra, you want to take us out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought on this question of sort of what is to be done, what are we doing, is one thing. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. There is no magic defeat fascism button. And it's like sometimes you can feel immobilized by trying to find the most strategic thing or the most valuable thing. And, there's down the street from me every Thursday, there's just a group of people protesting on the corner, and they're getting to know each other and they're building bonds. They can, then escalate and try new things from there. I mean, I think we also have to keep plugging away at different kinds of tactics. The Debt Collective just launched the first ever back rent debt strike. So we are organizing against a corporate landlord, the fifth largest corporate landlord in the country, Equity Residential. They have 85,000 housing units, and trying to develop a new strategy that can be one part of trying to figure out how we address this new economic and social problem, which is the concentration of housing in this country. It's part of why we are seeing rents go up, why we're seeing even more vicious evictions of people, why we are seeing spikes in housing insecurity. And so that work is important to do. And it doesn't directly speak to the federal emergency we're in, but what it does is it builds solidarity, because people are going building to building, door to door, and talking to their neighbors. And now there's this coalition of folks who never would have known each other, even though they live near each other, who have each other's backs and are in this struggle against this predatory landlord. So I think that kind of solidarity building is really important. I just got back from Italy, where there have been historic strikes, and that, so I spent 5 hours at a train station delayed because the trains were not running because people were not working. And what I heard from people was that this was actually a movement that was led by younger folks, younger Italians. And people were incredibly surprised by this, because younger Italians had been very politically tuned out and not politically engaged. And so there was a sense as well that this was about the devastation in Gaza, and also about the Great Flotilla movement that was on the seas at that moment and under siege. But that there was actually a way, it was also about speaking to the rise of fascism in Italy and the immorality of the Meloni government. And so what I took from that was this, incredible sense of global solidarity, but also that all these issues are connected, and that people were realizing that they were tying, to go back to what Naomi has said, conditions, the Palestine exception actually coming back and impacting people, not just in the US, but across Europe as well. And so this was something that seemed to be catching people pretty off guard. This was not a movement that they had pictured even a few months before. And so we always have to have that openness, that sense that we don't know what it is that's going to motivate people and cause the next uprising.
Awesome. Well, thank everybody for tuning in. Go take care of yourselves and each other, and keep connecting with Haymarket and all the people. And thank you to my colleagues and comrades. Love for y'all. And we'll see you next time. See you in the
Thanks
streets.
all.
Thank you.
Bye.